John Hagenberger. And in this little video, we're going to show you how to process a deer. It's Michigan deer season. Yesterday was opening day, and as you can see, we were lucky enough to get one. You know, a lot of guys get deer, and I ask them, "You going to cut that up yourself?" And they say, "Well, you know, I don't have the equipment, or I don't have the time, or, you know, I just don't know how." Well, what we want to do in this video is show you how really easy and simple and not a long time-consuming project it is to process your own deer. One of the things about processing your deer happens a long, long time before this stage, and that is shot placement. And again, guys, I just want to stress, don't take a bad shot. I mean, you owe it to the animal, you owe it to yourself to take a good shot. If you're getting a deer in the hind quarter, along the spine, or even in the neck, you're wasting a lot of good meat. Now, let me show you where we got this deer. It's about a 40-yard shot. I had shots at two other deer early in the morning that were running, but I just don't like to take a running shot, so I let them go and was rewarded with this one, a nice broadside shot. And as you can see, here's that shot right here. Shoulder is right here, back strap's up high. This went right through both lungs. She was 40 yards out, and this deer was a funny story. She ran right at my tree, and she passed within like 6 feet of the tree and died 12 feet behind me. So talk about an easy tracking job. That's the way to go. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut this deer up. You can't see it, but right behind you is my barbecue. And you can see that as we start processing this thing, I'm going to fire that sucker up, and we're going to enjoy some tenderloin, some backstrap, and some other meat. So let's sign off now. I'm going to show you some of the equipment that we're going to use in cutting up this fine animal. Well, let me just show you a few of the simple things that you need to process your deer. Obviously, it starts in the field with the field dressing. And you know, I see guys going out there and they have these Rambo Bowie knives strapped to their hip, but quite honestly, you don't need anything like that. Here's what I use, and I can't tell you how many deer I've cut up with this thing. This is just a single blade, folding, locking. It's a Craftsman blade, and pretty much with this one knife, I could virtually process that whole deer. I want to use some other knives just for convenience sake, but you don't need to have a butcher's array of knives. A little knife like this works wonders. This is great for field dressing, and that would be the subject of another video. For the actual processing, I do like to use a fillet knife. And again, I like to fish, so it's no problem. I already have this. This is a Schrade, and it's a very high quality knife. I do like for both of these to have high quality steel so they keep a nice edge. But you'll see as we go through, it is nice to have a little longer blade and a little more flexible blade. You will need a saw, and you can use either a hacksaw, which just about everybody has. If you don't have that, a crosscut or a rip saw will work just as well. And again, you'll use this to cut, I don't know if you noticed, but the forelegs, after skinning, you cut those off. We'll need this to cut through the pelvic bone later in the processing. But boy, I used to process my own deer and I would saw right through the spine. I don't do it that way anymore. It saves a lot of time, and I think you're going to like the way I do it. You will need, and I highly recommend you get a good knife sharpener. Now maybe you can use a whetstone and just do it by hand. I found I could never get that keen edge, so I went out and bought one of these. Has a little vise. You put the knife blade right in there, clamp it down, and then you have the stone with the guide, and it just puts a very, very sharp, a very, very keen edge on that knife. And I find using this smooth stone after every processing job, it just puts that edge right back onto the knife. Okay, now you can see too, we're not in a butcher shop here. We're in my garage. The deer's hanging up from the rafter, and it'll come along and just put chains through the gambrels of the deer, put a 2x4 in there to space it out, hook the chain up to the hook on the come-along, and just lifted her right up. If you don't have a come-along, no problem. This is the first year I've used it. In the past, I just take a rope, hang it over the rafters, 2 ropes, one in the left leg over the rafter, one in the right leg, spread those legs apart over the rafter. Worked fine. You don't need a lot of fancy equipment. My butcher block, as you can see, a couple sawhorses, some planks. I put a little shower cloth is what it is, just something to keep the blood from staining the wood, which I'll use again later. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention my rope. I can't tell you how many deer I've hauled out of the woods with this thing, and I've used it to hang a lot of deer as well. And it goes everywhere with me, just like my trusty knife. So as you can see, you don't need a lot of equipment. So let's go ahead and we'll start processing this deer. Thank you. Well, let's get started on processing this deer. Just a note on this deer, this is your basic deer. It was pound doe, I suspect. And since we're going to lose virtually no meat to a bad shot, I'm guessing we're going to get between 43, 48 pounds of bone meat off of this thing. First we're going to start with tenderloins. Some of the best cuts of meat you're going to find on a deer. And there's two of them, right here and right here. On beef, these would be your filet mignon. You can almost get these out with your bare hands. Simply just work your finger in between the tenderloin and, in this case, the bottom side of the rib cage. Just work it up and down, and you can really work right around so that you get your hands right on both sides of that, as you can see. You can literally break that right off, but I'm going to take my knife, the fillet knife that I mentioned earlier, go up as high as I can, get the knife in there, just with the tip of the knife, cut that right out. And there you have a beautiful tenderloin. Delicious. Let's flip this deer around now, and then we'll show you how to get the back strap off. Before actually getting the back straps, I'm going to show you how to get these shoulders off. When I used to process deer, first couple I did, what I would do is when they were just hanging up like this, I'd take a saw, cut it right down the middle of that backbone, and then sort of cut it right in half. So I quartered it, because that's the way I thought you had to do it. A friend of mine showed me a better way, and that's the way we're going to do it now. We're going to use gravity to help us in getting the shoulders off. In the shoulder, there's no real ball and socket type joint, so they will fall right off. What I'm going to do is just cut along the natural lines. You can sort of see there's no real muscle or bone there, so you just move, and I'm just going to sort of separate just along the way it normally flows. So just like that. You can see I'm just sort of cutting right along there. You can see up here it just sort of separates itself, so we're just going to keep using the tip of the knife, just work our way and cut that connective tissue, which is the only thing holding it to the rest of the animal. Just cut up, and just cut right around here. You can sort of see where that naturally flexes, and we'll just get the tip of the knife right in there. Just work it from both angles. See, it's just coming loose. Reaching in there with the tip of the knife, just separating the connective tissue, which is very apparent once you start opening things up. Just cut right where you can see that moving. Right where that's moving. Let it fall away. And there you go. See, there's no ball and socket type joints, so it just falls right away from the body. We'll put this over in our butcher block, and then we'll come back and take off these back straps. Alright, we've taken off both shoulders. We got the tenderloins from the inside. Now let's cut off the backstrap. And I think the backstrap is about the best cut of meat you're going to find on a deer. What we're going to do, and this is where it's helpful to have a longer blade fillet knife that's a little flexible, is we're just going to fillet this like you would fillet a fish. So I'm just going to start here in the middle where I can see the top of the spine. You can see that right through there is the spine. It's a little harder to find back here where you have more fat. But I'm just going to poke with my tip of my knife in there. And again, just like when you're filleting a fish, just keep the knife blade angled in toward the bone. That way you avoid cutting that precious meat. And I'm just keeping that blade blade, as you can see, angled this way. And I'm just working down, and you can work pretty quickly. Just when you hit, part of the spine, you just move the knife. And as you can see, as we open that up, just follow that spine. I like to go way down. I like to get as much of this tenderloin as I can. Now we're just going to open that up a little bit more. Again, using the tip of the knife, you can probably hear it bouncing off the ribs. That's fine. Now let's just go up. And we're going to go up, just work around the ribs using the tip of that knife. And I'm going to go up till I'm well into this hind quarter. That's probably far enough. And again, I'll just work my way back down, just working around those ribs. Just getting my fingers in there, pulling that meat right away. Right about here is going to be the end of your back chop, so I'm just going to cut in there a little bit. That's right about where the shoulder was. And now I can just continue to, with the tip of my knife, to pull it away. As you can see, we'll just pull that away and just keep separating it from the bone using the tip of the knife, just like you'd fillet a fish. And just using the tip of the knife. This thing here. Make my lateral cut here, right about the top of the ham. Just going down until I'm hitting bone. And then again, we'll just pull this away. Keep this thing in a position so you can see what's going on here. Now it's starting to come up, you can see a little more. So just using the tip of the knife. More what I'm doing is more separating than cutting. And this will just flip, virtually flip right out, as you can see. And then what we end up with is something just about like this. And then all I'm going to do for right now is just take my knife and cut down that, where the meat ends, obviously. Making sure not to cut any of that stuff. And there we go. There's a beautiful, beautiful backstrap. People ask me, we've had this deer hanging, how long has it been hanging? Should you let it age or whatnot? I guess I'm inclined to get the deer processed as quickly as we can, especially if it's warm weather. Now this was shot 2 days ago, and it's been like 28 degrees at night and getting up in the mid-40s during the day. That's like perfect weather for hanging a deer. But if it gets much warmer than that, I like to get it processed real quickly. So let's set this off to the side. I'm going to take the other one out, and then we'll come back and do the next step. Pretty good progress. Got the tenderloins out from the inside. By the way, and then we have the back straps here. If this were beef, typically what they would do is they would cut it right down the middle of that spine. And then the ribs and the backbone would form a T, hence your T-bone steak. The large side of the T-bone would be the back strap. The small side would be the tenderloin, or which also called the filet mignon, certain parts of the cut. And we've also taken the shoulders off, and you can see we're getting a lot of the good meat off of this thing. Now what I'm going to do is use my saw. I mentioned there's only a few things we have to saw. This is one of them. I'm just going to saw this neck off, and then later when we'll just take the meat off the bone and use that either for a roast or for a hamburger. So I'm just going to, I'm going to use a crosscut saw here. Again, you could use a hacksaw or whatever. I'm just going to go right in there. Get a good hole. There you go. I'll put this over on my butcher block, and then we'll take the meat off of this neck later. Well, we're really getting down there. Less and less of this deer left. Talk about the ribs a little bit. Some guys will just take their saw and cut these ribs and just use them just like you would beef or pork ribs. I don't tend to like it that much. There's too much fat in it for my taste, and I think that tastes a bit tallowy. So what I like to do is I'll just take my knife and I just trim off this, you can see just chunks of good meat that are all through here. Just cut this stuff out, just cut the meat away from the fat, in effect. Throw that on my scrap pile, and I use that for hamburger or chunks for the shish kebab and that sort of thing. Another thing you can do is just take your knife and just right between the ribs, just follow the bone right along. Cut that stuff right out. And then again, just separate the fat from the meat, save the meat, throw out the fat. As you can see, you just go down each rib like that just to get that good meat. Either way you like. In ribs or just to separate the meat and use it in burger or in chunks for shish kebab, which is totally up to you. There's one other thing I need to comment on here. I'm sure some of you have noticed in my jacket here. Well, the H stands for Heartland. That's where I went to high school in Heartland. And you might be thinking, what a jerk. That guy's still wearing his high school varsity jacket. Well, you know what? I'm proud of it. And I'll bet there's not too many of you out there that have had a jacket for 25 years that you can still wear. So if you're thinking I'm a jerk, you just think about that. We'll be right back, and when you get back, I'll have cut the backbone portion off, and we'll be left only with the hind quarter, and I'll show you what to do with those next. Alright, well, we took all the meat off that rib cage, or at least most of it, the stuff we wanted to save anyways, and then all I did is simply cut the backbone, as you can see right here. It took all of 5 seconds to cut through with the saw because there's just not that much bone at that point. What we're left with are your areas where you have a lot of meat. And I'm so glad that we had a good shot on this deer. I've seen them where somebody shoots him through the hip and you just waste so much good meat. In this case, you'll get to see what all that good meat looks like. What we do now is take, again, our saw, and I'm just going to cut right down the middle of this pelvic bone. Things down. Next time you see me is over at the butcher block. Well, we're just about ready to start actually cutting the steaks. One final thing we have to do is cut the shank bone here, and again that's the last thing for which we use our saw. Here's the kill tag, and you know what? I save every one of these things. I even saved the shell that I used to get the deer, and we pull those out every deer camp every night before opening day, and we just remember the great times we've had hunting. And I encourage you to do something like that too, just to relish these great memories we all have in the outdoors. So let me take my saw. I'm just going to cut that shank. This is the Achilles tendon right here, and that'll just cut with a knife. Put this over in the pile. Put my saw away. Making sure to clean that up later. And now what we have are all the pieces of the deer. And we have one half of them. So here's one hind quarter. Look at all that good meat on there. Ooh, baby. Backstrap. Nothing better. Shoulder, or front quarter. Now I'll use this for either stew or chunks for shish kebab. And the delicious tenderloins. They don't need anything. Just about eat these right now. We have the neck, which again we can use similar to the shoulder, either for roast or for chunks, or simply have it ground up into burger or sausage. And then I don't have a lot here, but just chunks of meat. Chunks for shish kebab, sausage, or what I do is mainly make hamburger out of it. And of course the heart, which we take after gutting it. This is really good, guys, and I encourage you to eat it. I just like to fry it up in some oil and butter and some onions, and we'll probably do that tonight. And it really is tasty. Okay, well, let me clear my table a little bit, and we'll start probably with this hind quarter, and we'll show you how to bone that and cut that into some delicious, wonderful steaks. Well, I don't know about you, but I like a boneless steak. Hard to beat that. And that's what we're going to do with this hind quarters. We're going to bone it out and then cut it into steaks. The way I used to do it is I would find about where the bone went and just take my knife and sort of jab it in there and just saw along the bone and try to work the meat away from the bone. Well, as I was doing that, I was cutting through these various muscle groups, and I found there's a lot better way to do that. I don't know how clearly it shows up, but you can sort of see there's like a dividing line here of just connective tissue. And so what I do is I just will cut into that a little bit just to cut that membrane. You can just see, use the tip of the knife, just cutting into that. Then you can sort of put your fingers right in there. And you can see I just barely slit that connective tissue. And what I'm doing is I'm just following the natural lines in the muscle group, and just reaching my fingers in there, and then where I need to cut, just again using just the tip of the knife, and not so much cutting and sawing as just separating along the natural break lines there. Again, we'll just keep cutting along. Wherever we find one of those breaks, we'll do that. I try to get as much of this connective tissue off the meat as I can, because I don't find that to be particularly tasty. Similarly, I try to get rid of as much fat as I can, because unlike beef, I don't find venison fat to be as good. Okay, we're right down on this muscle group here, we're right down to the bones. I'm going to flip this thing over and just take my knife and sort of, now I am working right against the bone and just separating the meat from the bone. Simple as that. Getting my fingers in there, pulling it apart a little bit, separating that meat right from the bone. Simple matter. Work over on this side just so I get a little more room. You can see in there, and again, just as I pull back, I can just see exactly where this stuff is connected. You can see I'm just taking the tip of the knife and just separating that connective tissue. Just opening things right up in there. Go up in here. I'm sure all these different muscles have names like porterhouse and that sort of thing. I sure don't know them. Cutting through some of that fat up here so I can then get in and take a better look. Just separating all these groups right out. Separates, we're almost free with this one. That'll make it a lot easier to see to get the rest of them. There's a little hip bone back here. We'll just cut right around that. You can see we're just laying that thing right open. And the tip of the knife. Okay, we're down to the fat. set that off to the side. Simple as that. Now let's continue to work here. Just cutting it right around the bone. It's the bone right in there. You can probably hear it. Just working that. Just keeping our knife edge pointed right to the bone so that we're not cutting meat. Just separating it from the bone. Same thing here. Just use the tip of the knife to start separating the meat from the bone. All the way down, even into this shank area. Wherever I see that connective tissue, I just use the tip of my knife and separate that stuff right out. The first couple muscle groups are a little harder because everything is still crammed in there, but once you get a couple of them out, it goes easier. A little bit of fat, I just throw that off to the side. Just more using my fingers almost in the knife. Just following the muscle groups. Get this little chunk out. There we go, there's another little piece. Come back up here, we got a little more room to see. So we'll just work gently around the bone on this group. Come up here, what do we got? Keep on separating. Really pretty simple. You don't need a chart or anything. Just follow the natural contours of the meat. Like all this connective tissue, that's junk. Just throw that stuff away. Frankly, I don't tend to be too picky at this point. I mean, I figure once I pull this out of the freezer, you know, I'm only working with a couple of steaks then I can be a little, you know, take a little more time and cut off all the excess fat, get rid of that connective tissue. But right now, I'll get what I can, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time trying to clean that stuff up. See, here we go. I'm just going to get this piece off. It's working right down to the bone. You do just have to cut it off of the bone. That's about what we have there. I'll just use this little piece here. That'll be a hamburger. This is of the steaks, this is my favorite. Again, I don't know what it's called. All I know is it's good. Okay. Again, we just see more of these connective tissues that hold the muscle groups together. We're just using the tip of the knife, separating them out. Bruised a little bit here. She wasn't shot there, but you know, from dragging her out or something. We were back in the swamp a good way, something on public land. Tons of hunters on the high ground. I like to take to the swamp where there aren't so many people. And last year we got 2. This is opening day, so hopefully we'll get another one this year. But I find you get those guys on the high ground that they don't sit still too long. They start moving around, and those deer head right down to the swamp, right where I am, and I'm glad to oblige them. See, it's getting easier and easier as you get these muscle groups off. Again, we're just going right against the bone. Up here, you just get some more what I call chunks. I'm not going to spend a lot of time doing that now. And down here too, this meat it is tough down here on the shank. But you know, if you're grinding it up in the hamburger, you don't notice it. So that's what I do with this stuff. Again, same way, just you see that line there that divides that muscle group, just the tip of the knife. Separate that stuff right out, right up against the bone. Around the joint there. And I'm not so worried about getting these out in big chunks because I'm just going to throw it in the hamburger pile anyways. Give you a feel for what we're trying to do here. Just separate the meat from the bone. Okay, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on camera doing this anyways, but now we do have, you can't get it all right down to the bone, so there's a little chunk of meat there. I'm not going to throw it away. Hamburger. Same thing, I'll just take my knife, you get a little chunk of meat here and there. Hamburger. Or better yet, we got the grill right behind us. We're going to fire that sucker up. We're going to throw some of these chunks in there right now. That's a goodie. So I'm going to finish cleaning this up. I'll set this meat to the side. Then we'll come back and we'll do a shoulder. Alright, we made quick work of that hind quarter. Let's take a look at a shoulder now. And this is a little more tricky. There's a fair amount of meat on the shoulder, but it's sort of all, it's not in like one big chunk like you might get in, this almost looks like a football to me. That's why I call it a football round. But it's just sort of spread out over the shoulder blade, which is, as you know, kind of a paddle-shaped thing. Best way I found to do it is just turn the shoulder so the outside, this would be the outside of the deer, is up. And you can feel, right along here, there's a bone. And it's the shoulder blade, and sticking up from that is a bone. What I like to do, and again, it's just about like filleting a fish, is just take your knife, work it up, angle it in, so that you're pushing against that upright bone, and just work against that bone. Just like that. We'll do both sides. And just go down till your tip of your knife hits the shoulder blade itself. And once you start opening that up a little bit, I just sort of angle my knife a little and sort of wedge between the shoulder blade itself and the meat. Again, just separating. You can sort of see how we're opening that up and just working my knife sort of this way now to get that meat off the bone. Kind of like you're skinning a fish. You're not really cutting, you're just separating. Okay, so we're pretty much to the edge of the blade on this side. Do the same thing on this side. Try to flip this around so maybe you can get a better view. But there's that upright bone. Here's the blade right there. I'm just sort of separating the meat right off of there. You turn it around because I can work better at it from this angle. Just like taking the skin off of a nice perch fillet or something like that. And just separate that stuff. You're not cutting. You could almost do it with a dull knife, but don't. And you can sort of see how things are looking. We're just sort of separating. There's the shoulder blade. Never hit that with your bow hunting. I've done that before. You don't want to. Okay, we're just cutting that right around that shoulder blade. And then we'll just find the shoulder. You can hear the knife in that. And again, just like before, we're just keeping the knife pressed right against the shoulder bone. You can see that there. And just following it all the way down. And just separating the meat from the bone. Simple matter. For the shoulders, I don't try to separate the muscle groups. They're just too small. You really couldn't get a good steak out of it, I don't think, anyways. So I just try to get the meat off and leave the bone behind. And then you could, use some string, like a rolled roast, or make hamburger out of it, or cut it up into shish kebab chunks. And by the way, we're running out of tape here, we'll have to switch tapes, but kids love shish kebab, so don't throw these chunks away. Use it for either hamburger or shish kebab chunks. We're going to change this tape, we'll be back up and finishing this roast. Well, we're almost done with this shoulder roast, and again, just keep working with the tip of the knife right around that bone, and we'll just separate the meat from the bone just like we did before. And you'll see in just a minute that we end up with a good chunk of meat, but it's not a huge piece of meat. So it's all kind of dangly, I guess you call it. So I'll just finish up here real quickly. Again, just meat from the bone. That's the key. Okay, we're getting there. Haven't cut myself yet. I hope you noticed that. Now we're working on the back side of the blade. meat left on there, but that's pretty clean. Here's what I was talking about. That's a lot of meat. But again, it's not like a chunk you could make into a steak or something like that. Good bit of fat there, so I'll just take my knife and kind of just, as you can see, just try to get the fat and leave the meat. Again, I'll get these big chunks now, but for the most part, I'm not going to do a lot of trimming at this phase. I'll do that when I pull it out of the freezer before cooking it, because then you just have more time. You can do a better job of it. But I'll get the big chunks now, just throw those off into the scrap. And again, what do I do with this? I make it into hamburger. But you could probably cut it into, let's just sort of do that to show you, into a chunk. You know, just make a rolled roast, you know, tie it together like that. And I'll bet if you laid a couple of strips of bacon in there, rolled that up, some potatoes and carrots, roasted pan, you'd probably end up with a pretty good roast. What I'm going to do with that, set that in this pile with the hamburger meat. Let me get the neck. And again, same sort of thing. We'll just spend a few minutes here, but what I'm going to do is just take my knife, go down to the bone, and I'm just working the meat from the bone. The neck is, you're going to end up with hardly any good solid chunks of meat. So I don't try to be particularly careful here. In fact, a lot of times I'm just going to cut off chunks of meat. Again, I'm not going to make a roast out of it. You can see it's sort of lined with more of the tallowy, fatty stuff, which I find is not that tasty in venison. Down on the bottom side here, let me show you something that's pretty cool. Maybe you haven't seen this before. You'll find it interesting. This is the windpipe. You ever wonder where they get a grunt tube idea from? Oh, look at that. That's the real thing right there. Okay, I'm not going to spend any more time on this neck roast, but again, you can see you just sort of have like layers of meat almost, and there's bones all through here. So I just sort of try to cut off good-sized chunks of it. Cut the heavy fat off, and throw it in my hamburger pile. See, I'm not trying to be too careful here because it's not like a steak or a tenderloin or anything like that, so I'll just get most of the big chunks of fat. This is where a nice sharp knife is really handy. It's not uncommon to pull up your sharpening stone and put a new edge on the knife even while you're processing, because knives do get dull. Okay, so get most of that fat off of there. You can see it's just sort of riddled with that stuff, see? Just cut around it. Cut it right out of there. There you go. Throw that in the hamburger pile. I just had some venison chili tonight. Man, it was good. So again, you just keep doing the same sort of thing with the neck, and what I do is throw the piles in there. Okay, let me put this stuff off to the side, and I'm going to get the backstrap and show you what I do with that. Go. That looks good enough to eat right now, if you ask me. Okay, notice on the back of this, there is a big chunk of fat. And again, this is very much, this sort of pulls right off. Where it doesn't, that just comes out. If you were to have processed this deer when it was warm, this would have been much more like Jell-O almost, and you could almost just sort of squeeze it off, but as it's had a chance to set up, it's a little more like lard or something like that. Also on the back of the backstrap is this, you can sort of see that silvery type membrane. That is very thick stuff. And you do want to get rid of that. And what I try to do is just like skinning a fish. You know, you sort of lay, if you had a big salmon fillet or something, sort of lay it down, you take your knife, sort of work it down to that membrane, hold that membrane down as you would the skin on a fish, and just keeping your knife blade pointed down against that membrane. Just work slowly to separate that stuff. So that, as you can see, we're just separating that membrane from the meat, but leaving all the good meat. I'm going to put this right on the edge so I get my knife into there real well. So there you can see, I get the membrane, but no meat. And that's good enough. There's a little bit more. You can start at the other end, but for what we're doing here, I just wanted to show you how I do that. It's much easier to work on it with the membrane side down than this way, because this way you're constantly cutting into the meat. I don't try to get it all off right now. Again, I'll do that later. Okay, the only other piece of meat, we move this stuff off to the side. We have pretty much all of our meat here, and we boned it out. So we have the hind quarter, which would be our steaks. We have part of the neck, and then the shoulder, and then chunks, which I'll use for either chunks for shish kebab or for hamburger. And then we have our back strap and our tenderloins. Let me show you what I do with this stuff. First of all, we'll start with what I think is the easiest, and that would be the back straps. Here's how I do it. Take my knife. I prefer a nice thick steak, so I'll cut it about like that. Get a nice medallion. And just cut it all the way down. Just keep cutting. If you have a smaller deer, this was an average sized deer. I mean, they do come smaller, obviously. You can cut more on an angle, and you'll get a bigger chunk. What some guys like to do is cut them like double thick, and then make a butterfly steak, which you do is by cutting down, but not all the way through, just so you can then open that up, and you have a larger, looks like a larger steak. Either way, whichever you prefer. We're just going to line these up right here, and we'll get ready to package them. I won't cut all of this just because I don't want to bore you too much, but again, if you like your steaks thinner, well then by all means cut it a little thinner. If you like them thicker, cut it as thick as you like. So I got some of that membrane here. Just working my way around that. Cut a couple more. I'm going to just set that off to the side right now. Just lay that one by it so you can see what we're looking at. For the tenderloins, boy, it's not like they're real huge. I just pretty much cut them in half. And these are so tender. I mean, that's obviously why they're called tenderloin. And we'll set those off to the side, just get ready to package them up. You can see sometimes where the meat has been exposed to the air, and this has been now for a couple of days, it gets a little dark. Don't worry about that. It's perfectly fine. It's just a little dark from the blood being on there, but you might want to cut that off when you get ready to cook it, but it's fine. Steaks, again, very simple. Take a chunk of the meat, and usually I'll cut, just square off the end. And what I'll do is I'll just throw that in my hamburger pile. And then again, this is one of my favorite steaks. So again, I like them, not super thick, but on the thicker side. So I'll just get a good firm grip on that steak. Man, that looks good. And just trim it right up. How's that look? Fit for a king. You just cut a couple of those just so we can package them up. I can show you how I do that. Very healthy meat, by the way. Very little fat. It's very, very lean. Doesn't that look good? You go to a butcher shop and you try to find a cut of meat like that. Okay, so I'm going to set that right here with these ones. Some of the steaks have a little different look and feel. Again, I'll square this one off. Put that over there. And then again, try to get rid of most of the, the big gunk up. Set that off. But again, I'm just going to cut it into a couple nice steaks here. As thick as you like, or as thin as you like. I suppose you could even make a roast out of some of these. I just happen to prefer steak, so that's the way I cut it. But boy, that looks pretty darn good. We'll just set that here. And the same with this other. I still have a muscle group here to separate, so just do that. Some of the chunks are very big, some are pretty small. I hope you noticed I've been doing this with one knife, and I could just about as well have done it with this, but you can see the benefits of having the longer blade that I mentioned earlier. Again, square off the end. Not really good enough for a steak. You got one thin end, one thick end. It's hamburger. Cut a couple here. Just for example. This is another of my favorite cuts right here. Again, I don't know what it's called, but boy, it just looks so succulent, and it is really very, very good. Set a couple of these off, set those off to the side. Then there's this chunk here, and it almost kind of looks like a tenderloin or part of the backstrap. It's not. There's a good bit of fat on there. Just work that off. But it's kind of like almost like a big sausage or something like that, and I just tend to sort of cut that on an angle. And I'll show you what I do with some of these things. You can see it has a little different, even, I don't know how well it comes through on the camera, but it's a much denser type of meat, and it's just not quite as tender. So we'll set that off to the side. Okay, let me take a break. I'm going to clear the table a little bit, get my wrapping paper out, and we'll show you what you do with this stuff now that you got it all cut up. Be right back. Great, well, we're back. Reynolds freezer paper, buy it at any grocery store, some masking tape, magic marker, and we're ready to go. I like to rip out a few sheets at a time, and I know about 18 inches, 2 feet long or so, certainly no less than that. The key in preserving your venison is keeping it from getting freezer burn. And freezer burn is simply caused by air coming in contact with the meat. So you don't want to skimp on the paper. You don't want to put a big chunk of meat in a little tiny piece of paper. So let me just show you with a piece like this what I do. So let's say we have the tenderloin right here. Cut it in half, so we have 2 pieces in here. I'm going to wrap these individually. Why? Because I'm probably going to be the one eating these. So I don't want to have both of them in the same package, because then I'm going to have to thaw both at the same time. I don't want to eat them at the same time. So what I tend to do is put it on one end of the paper, one end of the corner, and then I just sort of roll it up. And you can see I'm getting several layers of paper on there. At this point I'll fold that one end over, roll it, fold it, and I just complete the rolling as such. I've taken several strips of the masking tape and just lined them on the edge here so they're readily available. Piece of masking tape holds everything in place. Magic marker, I'll put tenderloin. And I like to put the date on there as well, because I still have some deer in the venison in the freezer from last year. I want to make sure I use that stuff up before I use the fresh stuff. Set that off to the side. Next sheet. Okay, here we go. A couple of the tenderloins. You can have a little bit of bigger piece of paper here, that's fine. I'm sorry, it's backstrap. I think I said tenderloin. Wrap that up nice and tight. I don't want any air in there. I'm being really careful, as you can see. Backstrap. $11.15.99. And sometimes I'll even put how many are on there. That way, if you're having friends over or something, and you pull out a package, are there 3, or there 4, or there 5 in there? Here I know there's 2. So if it's just me, that'll do fine. If I'm having friends over, I need to pull out 2 packages of 2 or whatever. I also like to put the date because, like last year, I got a buck and a doe. Well, some people say they can tell the difference. Frankly, I can't. But this way, if someone asks me, "You didn't have buck or that doe, John?" Well, I know because of the date I got it. Another thing. Sometimes you get a piece of steak like this one here. I mean, that's enough. It's not your best cut of meat, quite frankly. So I'll wrap that up individually. things in there. One steak, and I put a little J for John. That means, John, that's for you. Don't serve that to your company. And then, of course, the date. Now, another thing I like to do, make it to the steaks I really like these ones right here. Man, that looks good right now. I'll wrap these babies up. And I'll write on there 2 prime steaks and the date. And again, so when I go to pull that out, I know exactly what I'm pulling out. Okay. So that's basically, you get a feel for how I wrap things up and how I mark them. And again, I'll take this right in the house when we're done here and put it in the freezer and get it on ice. With the scraps, if you're working with chunks for like shish kebab, and I do both shish kebab and hamburger, cut them up into good sized chunks. Remember, you're going to put in a skewer through there, so you want them, decently sized. Get, I don't know, maybe a pound or so worth of chunks, or however many. Again, I have 3 cuts of meat: steaks, chunks, and burger. If it's big enough for a steak, that's what it is. If it's big enough for a chunk, that's what it is. If it's not, piece of paper, just plop them right on there. Chunks. Use this for, like I was saying, shish kebab or stew, or even throw it in some chili or whatever, but at least I know what's in there. And I'll tell you, kids love shish kebab. We try to have families over a lot, and kids just go nuts. Let them make their own, have the skewers and all the stuff put out. Instead of a shish kebab, it's a shish katim or a shish kasal, whatever the kid's name is. But they love that. Final thing would be the hamburger meat. And what do I do with that? I'll take it and put it in a bucket or a plastic bag or something like that, and find a butcher or a deer processor that'll grind that stuff up. A lot of times I find you can't take it like Kroger or your grocery store because of regulations where they can't grind game in the same machines that they do the USDA inspected meat. But a deer processor will grind it up for you, no problem, probably 30-40 cents a pound. I like to have some pork or beef suet cut into my burger just to add a little fat, little flavor. But I just take this off to the side, keep it in the fridge until I'm ready to go to the processor, take it over there, and I typically have them package it up after it's ground into 1-pound packages. If you're feeding a big family, you probably want more. But for me, 1 pound is fine. You get a few hamburgers out of there, enough for some chili, and away you go. Well, we're going to fire up that grill. We're going to take a couple of these back straps, maybe one of my favorite cuts of beef here, and venison. Fire that stuff up, and we'll be right back and show you some of the finished product. So stay with us, we're almost done. Well, there you go. Some beautiful, beautiful back straps that we have cooked right here, and I can tell you that is some good stuff. But we're pretty much done. We do have a little more cutting to do, a little more wrapping, then we'll take this stuff to the freezer. But I think you can see, this was a pretty easy process. We didn't have any special equipment, didn't have any special array of butcher's knives or butcher's blocks or band saws to cut through bone and that sort of thing. Just had stuff that you have in your house or your garage right now. To process a deer, average sized deer, takes about 3.5 to 4 hours after you've done a couple. And it really doesn't matter if you get a big deer or a little deer, it takes about the same amount of time. Actually, the big ones are a little bit easier to work on, just like it's easier to fillet a big fish than a small fish. But again, I find this to be so enjoyable. I mean, I just like the processing the deer. I like it when I thought throughout the year, I know that I shot that deer, I gutted it, I skinned it, I processed it, and now I'm enjoying it. I want to thank you for joining us. I want to thank the good Lord for providing this food for us and this enjoyment of hunting and the freedom that we have in this country to hunt. I want to finally end by encouraging you to take a kid hunting if you would. My father-in-law was telling me he knew this judge in Texas in an In all the years that he sat on bench, never once did he see before him a kid that had either a fishing license or a hunting license. If you know a kid that would love to be out there in the woods or out there on the river or the lake, by all means, take him hunting or fishing. Do him a favor. Do yourself a favor. Thanks for joining us. Good luck hunting. We'll see you later.